Welcome, everybody. Today, we're talking about Habit Formation 101, proven strategies to help your child create lasting habits. I'm your host, Ann Dolin, and for the last 25 years, almost 26, my team of subject tutors, test prep tutors, executive function coaches have been helping kids to do better in school and ultimately to learn lifelong strategies in areas like organizing, planning time, and studying more effectively. So they can take those strategies certainly throughout high school and into college and likely into the workforce as well. So I'm so glad you're here with us this afternoon. And I would love to introduce Rachael Moss to you. Rachael, hello and good afternoon.
Hi, Anne. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So Rachael is an executive function coach with us here at Educational Connections, and she also serves as our in-house professional development expert. Prior to coming to Educational Connections, she worked as a high school teacher for more than 10 years. And there she taught students in a variety of classes. Oh, and by the way, she also taught at the college level. But in high school, she taught AP Literature, AP Expository Composition, Journalism, Debate, and SAT and ACT prep classes. And at the university level, she taught everything from basic composition to the nuances of writing dissertations. Rachael holds a master's degree in literature and secondary, and also another one in secondary education, and a certificate in teaching English to speakers of other languages, and that's a certification through Cambridge University. So Rachael, whoops, I should have clicked through these so everybody can see your background. Let's start talking about where we see kids right now at this time of year. You know, when kids start anything new, it might be a new year or a new semester, they often have really big intentions of how this time it's going to be better. And I can share with everyone things that kids have told me over the years that are really common. They were common 10 years ago, and they're certainly common now. For example, this semester, I won't stay up late, and I'm going to try not to procrastinate so much. I'm going to really work to turn in all my work on time and not to have any more late assignments. Sometimes kids will say, I really want to do better in a particular subject, like math. Or they might say, I want to be more organized. So as you can tell from all these intentions, and by the way, kids will often share these with us as their executive function coaches, because we talk about these things a lot. Sometimes they won't always share them with their parents, but they are thinking about how they can improve. But what you'll notice about all of these intentions is that they're really, really broad. And this is common of kids. They will have these, as I mentioned, grand ambitions, but it's much, much harder for students to break these things down into manageable steps and to make them into habits. So Rachael, do these things sound familiar to you?
Oh my goodness, yes. And the one thing that I do want to mention about all these intentions are, these are beautiful. These come from a real place. These come from goals that kids set. But all of them, they are big, they are broad, and generally kids have no idea how to reach these intentions. They do not know how to start making these things into doable habits that fit into their routine. So one of the beautiful things about being an executive function coach is when I get an intention like this from a kid, I want to start breaking that down into the little parts that kids can achieve every single day.
Yes, for sure. And this isn't just for kids. You know, as adults, we have difficulty breaking things down and making them more manageable. So I want to bring up a really interesting study. This is actually from 2009, and it was a study looking at habit formation around a fairly common goal for adults of taking a walk after dinner at night. And I'm curious, for everybody out there, for all the parents out there, if as an adult you want to change a habit and you want to now add a walk after dinner, how long do you think it would take you to create this habit? And this is referencing the study of thousands of people. I'm wondering how long you think it would take you or an individual in this study to create this lasting habit of taking a walk after dinner. Please put your answer or your very best guess into the chat. I'm curious what everybody thinks. Denise says 3 months. Darcy says 29 days. Somebody said 21 days, 6 weeks, 30 days, 40 days, 4 months, 3 weeks, 30 days, 3 weeks, a month, 8 weeks. Lots of great answers. Well, it turns out, actually, everybody is right. The answer is it took adults between 18 and 254 repetitions to turn this into a habit. That's really broad. So why is habit improvement not so simple as it takes 21 days to change a habit, which we know through lots of research that that is not true at all. Well, first, obviously, it depends on the task. It depends on somebody's motivation and willingness. And also it depends on their ability to stick with something. And so when we think of habit formation, when it comes to kids, we often see the same broad range. Let's say the student who says, I want to do better in math, which is kind of a common one, or I want to get a better grade in AP biology. Whatever the habit is, we know from research that there are actually 4 steps that habits take in order for them to work. So one is thinking, one is planning, one is doing, and one is assessing. Rachel, can you talk a little bit about these 4 steps? Maybe when it comes to a habit like a broad one, I want to do better in math.
Absolutely. So that I like to how you have this structure to end with these kind of questions that go along with the steps, because these really mirror the types of questions that I ask kids in sessions. So when they say, I want to do better in math, okay, well, why is that meaningful to you? And there I'm asking for them to talk about maybe what motivates them or what brought them to that idea of improvement. The planning stage is something, that we start working on immediately in sessions, and you really get to see happen over months. Like, how am I going to do this? When will maybe doing your homework a little bit more frequently, when will that fit into your routine? How will that fit into your routine? And I really try to make sure that I'm working with every kid individually. So I'm not going to use strategies. Maybe I have a kid on my roster who's really gifted in math, and then I have one on my roster who struggles a little bit. Everything is about the individual learner. So I'm looking at, how does this kid's day go? How would that plan fit in with that kid's life? The doing phase is where you really start to see the habit taking shape and where you really get measurable success. So once the kid starts to take action and starts to achieve results, you just watch them like they chase it. Once that learning starts to feel positive and good for them, once that doing starts to happen, then they just want more of it. And that's really like, I cannot wait for that to happen for every kid on my roster. The assessment phase is also something that is really wonderful in our sessions, because whenever we set this intention, we also set a goal of, okay, how am I going to know when I hit it? I want to do better in math. Are you going to just tie this to your GPA, or can we tie it to other things? Maybe feeling more confident in class, maybe wanting to raise your hand right on the board, maybe wanting to go put yourself out there a little bit more. So we always set goals of how we can figure out if that habit is making progress, not just like say we're going to do something and never talk about it again.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So those are the 4 steps that have to be present in order to form a habit. But also, once you know the why do I want to do this? You have a plan, you're doing it, you're assessing. There's also 3 R's of habit formation. And this basically means that in order to create this habit and stick to this habit, there have to be these 3 things present. Rachel, you want to talk a little bit about reminder, routine, and reward?
Absolutely. So there are a million ways to do this. This is another one where I would say this, you have to look at, what influences, motivates each kid. So I'm going to give you, one example of a student that I'm working with who is actually working on a math goal. right now, wants to do better in their math class. So they use a combination of reminders, and reminders can be things like maybe their reminder is coming from their teacher, it's coming from Schoology, it's coming from mom and dad. And I'll tell you what, it's definitely coming from me, because when we set something as a priority at the top of every one of that student's sessions, I say to them, okay, let's first check in on math and then let's look at the rest of your priorities. But the reminders can come from outside and also from like inside the kid themselves. Routine is really important because when we want to hit those goals, we have to figure out, how do these new habits fit into the kid's, day? So this particular student is in middle school, pretty simple schedule, and they have what's called an advisory period, where they can go and they can meet with a teacher and work on something. We crafted a routine where this student meets with their math teacher on a certain day of the week that happens to coincide with the session that we have together. So again, that also builds another part of the routine into it. And then they can constantly have that to strengthen that math skill and to get that specialized support that they can get from their math teacher, and also the executive function coaching that they get from me. The reward is really all about, the individual kid. For some kids, it's something physical, maybe I have one particular student that will reward themselves after they do their homework with, playing some video games. I have other students where the reward is just the darn thing is done and they don't have to think about it anymore. So the reward doesn't necessarily have to be something tangible, but it has to be something meaningful to the student. And that's something I talk about kids with. Maybe the reward for you is you don't have to think about math. It's done.
Mm.
Maybe the reward is go play basketball with your friends, So that's another thing in sessions that I try to tap into. What would be rewarding for this kid? Because for me, sometimes a reward is a popsicle, sometimes it's a nap. So I want to make sure, yeah, it fits with kids.
Yeah, for sure. It definitely is individualized. And by the way, there's an amazing book by James Clear, and you've probably heard about it because it's been on the bestseller list for a long time. But it's called Atomic Habits, and it really goes deeper into the 4 steps of formation and the 3 R's to start and keep a habit. So we know that habits can that they require a little bit of effort, but they're even harder for kids with ADHD. And why is that? Partly because sometimes students with ADHD, it's not just focus, but they also kind of get into this mode of wanting immediate gratification. So sticking with something is particularly difficult for them. Rachel, what do you see in your kids with ADHD? Or maybe they don't have a diagnosis, but they have a lot of the symptoms.
I share this with students in my sessions, and this is one of the things that brought me to becoming more serious about executive function. I dealt with a chronic pain condition for 2 years, and it really affected my ability to concentrate on things. And so some of the things that I talk about with my students are things that have worked for me. Because when you can't concentrate, when you can't focus on things, it makes transitioning between activities and ideas very difficult. And it doesn't even have to be big things. The transition between I am watching YouTube to now I have to do homework can be very big for a kid that is dealing with something like ADHD or just an attention issue. So one thing that a strategy that I like to use with students that I use with myself are called time cushions. Okay, so you're going to do homework, you want to watch a little bit of YouTube. Give yourself 10 minutes in between those things. Transition more slowly from one thing to another. I also think that this is great when students are moving between different subjects. I work with students that are in middle school, high school, and college. Sometimes we're bebopping between a physics class and an English class. We're looking at a philosophy class and a cardiology class. You need a little bit of a cushion, a transition between those things. And I think that that's a great way to help kids kids self-regulate more, better understand themselves, and also get their work done.
That's a great point, because I think sometimes as parents, especially type A parents, we're like, come on, let's go get this done, this and that and the other thing. But for kids, you're right. They really, really do need that downtime. What about physical buffers? I know that can be super helpful to kids too.
Yeah, and you know what? I love that you mentioned that, because it makes me think of a particular student on my roster, and they use a physical buffer to do work. And this is honestly a suggestion that I gave the student, because this was something that I learned about myself in college. I can get all my work done in the library. I can get all my work done in a coffee shop. As soon as I go home, that's where my dog and my Nintendo are. That is a land of distraction, right? So this particular student found that when they did their homework in the school library, and this is a school where, and this is a high school student, I want to give that as a little bit of context, that they have an after school period where it's like a transition between the end of the school day and then the beginning of like activities, sports, that type of thing. This student created a routine where they would gather their books, and instead of like going to the cafeteria, listening to music, hanging out with friends, a couple of days a week, they would go to the library, and they are amazed by how much work they can get done in 30 minutes. And in our sessions, they'll come to me, do you understand? I got this whole chapter done. It wasn't even a whole class period. Like, the joy that this particular student has figuring out these things about themselves, it's magical. It just keeps you going as a teacher.
I love that. And it makes sense why, we go to Starbucks and we see so many people with their laptops and, they're going to work there. It sounds like a lot of this self-discovery really takes place in conversation. What I found in working with kids over the years is that the minute you tell a kid what to do, like, all bets are off. They don't want to hear it. They don't. If you say you need to do it like this, or you should do this, it doesn't really work. It definitely doesn't work for a parent either. But how do you create conversations around getting buy-in from kids?
Well, I really try to figure out what motivates the kid. I really try to also figure out like who the kid is. Is this kid quiet? Is this kid more outspoken? Because I think, you've been listening to me. I have a very effervescent personality, but that doesn't mean that I have to lead with that with kids. So I let the student do the leading, and then I follow them. And we're gonna talk about the student self-assessment, right? Because really that is the student self-assessment is what we do at the beginning of every single session. This is like session one. The student and I have a conversation that is organized by this student self-assessment. And this is where things get real. So I will talk to students like, okay, you're cramming for tests. How do you feel about that? Does that feel stressful? Does that feel invigorating to you? What is it about your math class that you don't want to do the homework for it? What is it about the Spanish class that you are never procrastinating? And kids start to open up their hearts to you about how they feel about school. Because school isn't always a place where, and I think we can all think about ourselves as kids. There were classes where I felt super confident. There are classes I didn't want to be there. And having these conversations with kids and giving them a space where they can tell you what they really think, what really motivates them, it creates that layer of professional trust that allows us to come up with routines and plans that are going to work for them and that are going to really help them hit their goals.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as parents, and I know this is what you and the other executive functions coaches use when working with students, as parents, we want to be talking to kids, but, sometimes kids will say, how was your day? We'll get fine. Yeah. We'll ask what we think is a good question, and we'll get a very, slight answer. So, anytime if you want to break down the language and have an easier conversation, you'll notice in our self-assessment, we give kids choices. How do you feel about this? And there's 4 choices. So when talking to kids as a parent, you might say, instead of how was your day, on a scale of 1 to 5, how did math feel today, for example? And, it's like a Google review. 5 is amazing, 1 is terrible. And sometimes it's breaking things down into smaller chunks like that enables us to have conversations with kids. And Rachel, I will mention that you put together an amazing ebook for parents, which I love. And it has the 3 strategies that are just so uber successful. One of my favorite is habit stacking, which I love. And if you're listening, you can get this at just type in bit.ly/EC for educational connections -habits. And you can get it right there and download it. And Rachel, you did such a great job with this ebook, really taking 3 main strategies that are really, really work for kids and putting them all together. So thank you for that.
Thank you. And I think there are also strategies that parents can use. And the only thing I want to say about this little ebook is I really stressed collaboration, that these are things not only kids can do, but parents can do too, and create that sort of like community within the family of having new habits.
Awesome. I love that. All right. So let's dive into some really common issues that we often see, when we think, oh, I really want the student to develop a better habit around this. So the first one that's really common is the student continually underestimates time. And so they're just not a great judge of how long something will take them. Can you talk a little bit about what that might look like? And then we'll go to the solution in just a second.
Yeah, I think probably every parent has had something, whether it is a science fair project, a research paper, where you as the adult are very concerned about this. And the kid's like, it's only going to take an hour. It's only going to take 2 hours, because they're really not thinking about the whole of the project. So this is something that I talk about in all of my sessions with students. With younger ones, I'm thinking of a very specific younger student that I was working with that was doing a science project and was like, well, I just have to make a poster board and that's not going to take that long. And I was like, when are you going to the store? This is a youngster that can't drive. You know what I mean? So kids are thinking about the end product. They're also really, in my experience, they're thinking about the due date. Oh, well, this isn't due for 3 weeks and it's due on a Friday. So I really only have to, start this on Thursday, that type of thing. And we've all been there. I mean, I think that even as adults, there are times where we think about something, well, it's only 10 minutes away, but we're not thinking about the 15 minutes it takes to leave the house. We're only thinking about that 10-minute drive. This is human,
For sure.
Yeah.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And so tell us a little bit about backwards planning and how that's helpful to students and what parents can do too.
I love backwards planning. This is something that I came to about 10 years ago when I was in the classroom. I taught I taught over 150 ninth graders how to write a research paper. So I can literally do anything. And I broke down for students how long it was going to take. Most kids are correct. Let's use that research paper as an example. It's only going to take me 2 hours to type up. That is not incorrect. They type fast, they know how fast they type, and they know the length, maybe 4 pages, right? But they're not thinking about, I have to find 4 sources in the library. And how long does it take me to read a source? What if the source is a book? How long does it take me to take notes on it? How long does it take me to get all of my notes from class and incorporate those? How long does it take me to edit something? So by simply using a calendar, we can break this down for kids. Okay, so if it takes you 2 days, let's say 2 evenings to read a source, let's back that up. Now we're going to have to say, okay, maybe it's going to take me, once I have my sources read, maybe 2 or 3 days to write about those, back that up. So it's looking at all of the parts and really plotting them down. And this is something that, we do all the time. I used the example earlier of like going to an appointment. Every time you put an address into Google Maps and look at how long it's going to take you to get there and what time you have to leave the house, that is a form of backwards planning. But of course, when we put this into an academic setting, whether it's a research paper, a science fair project, a math problem set, we're really unpacking for kids how you understand how long something takes you in relation to that due date.
Yes, definitely. And, one question parents can ask kids just to kind of get started in the process is, oh, tell me what your first step is. Because you're right, kids are thinking about the due date and what it looks like typing up the paper. Well, that's the last step. So by asking what's the first step, that's, can get things started. We also see, Rachel, that kids have a lot of preconceived notions. Like, this is super common, kind of going back to the waiting the last minute. Sometimes students think, well, I have to wait until the last minute. That's when I do my best work, because basically my back is up against the wall and I don't have a choice. The adrenaline's flowing and I get it done. Yeah. However, we know through lots of research that it's not, the outcome isn't really conducive of that strategy, because kids feel a lot more stress and actually their work product is much lower than if they had started earlier. So things like, if I have to stay up late and, wait until the last minute to do it, I don't need a lot of sleep, that assignment won't take me that long. How do you deal with preconceived notions?
Well, I have to say that in my experience, backwards planning kind of shatters the preconceived notions. And backwards planning too is one of those things where when you first present it to the kid, there's not a lot of buy-in, because procrastination means it's a tomorrow problem. Backwards planning means it's a today task, right? So what I've found though is that once they start to see that it removes stress, all of these preconceived notions, these are all statements, in my opinion, that are covering up vast amounts of student stress. And they're kind of like ways to contextualize that for themselves and almost to like excuse it. Like, well, I can sleep tomorrow, or that's how I get a good grade. I just stay up all night and work on it. Once they see that they can have more control over their lives, and more command of their work, these notions are then shattered. And I love when that happens. I'm thinking of a particular student that I have, an 11th grader, that these were all their statements. And this student is now doing some backwards planning. We're getting to full backwards planning, but we're on the path. And the student is working on a really big anatomy project right now. And in the last session, this student looked at me and said, this is the first anatomy project I'm just not stressed about. And I said, what? I said, like, reflect on that. Why do you think that is? And they go, I think it's maybe because like I'm doing it now and not the night before. And it's like you just bite the inside of your mouth because it's so cute. It's now their idea. It took a while to get there, but this student is seeing the value in these strategies. And that value has become part of who they are as a student. And the confidence is just, it's wonderful. And it's wonderful too, not to see this kid stressed out, just to see them working calmly, going over things, asking questions of their teacher.
That's amazing. I love that, yeah. Rachel. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, our next common issue is that assignments are late. So kids are not turning in assignments on time. Sometimes they actually do a lot of it, but they don't get to that final step of turning it in.
Yeah. I have actually 2 students on my roster that this is something that we're working on. And one of them is in college and one of them is in high school. And what I've noticed, this isn't going to apply to every kid, of course, but this is something that I have noticed talking to the kids on my roster, that this is their issue. There's something about judgment, and there's something about it's real now. Like if I turn this in, what if I get a bad grade on it? I just did all this work on it. It's like it gets too real for them, and there's a stressor there. And I have to admit, as an educator, this is not one I particularly understand. I don't understand why you do something and then you don't turn it in. But then again, I don't have to understand it to help a kid work on it, you know? So when I ask those particular kids about, okay, tell me about that stressor, the first thing is just getting them to try to turn things in, setting a goal of, okay, you know what, last semester, last 9 weeks, you had about a 50% success rate. Could we get that up to 75%? Let's turn in 75% of things. I will also make agreements with them. You know, is it okay with you if I bug you about this every session? Is it okay with you if we check in on that? You know, we want to turn those assignments in on time. And through those gradual measures, what I have found out is that as they get the assignments turned in, some of that fear, that stress, and even those kind of like some of the things that they've expressed are like almost like shame feelings. Like, I just don't think it's good enough. I think my teacher really likes me, but if they see this work that I've done, they're not going to like me as much. Once they get that work turned in and they get real grades on it and real feedback, their concept of themselves starts to change. So the fear inside their head is overwhelmed by the reality of their experience. And so then getting those turn-ins is even easier.
You see this a lot with perfectionists?
I would say, yeah, that when the one thing that as I'm thinking about all of the kids on my roster that deal with this, they are the kids that have very high standards for themselves. I mean, one that I'm thinking of is a tremendous athlete. Another one is a tremendous artist. And so you have these children who are incredibly gifted. And it's almost as if, well, what if my gifts don't translate into these other areas? Or what if people don't think that I am as good as they say I am? You know?
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen that too. That's such a great point, Rachel. It plagues kids, and it's so frustrating to parents to see that, wait, you're almost done with this. Why didn't you turn this in?
Yeah.
So it's easy to understand why that can happen. Well, certainly habit formation really isn't easy. You know, taking an old habit and creating a new habit, it takes a lot of work, and, you know, it often takes guidance. I know one of the strategies in the ebook that we mentioned is called habit stacking, which I really, really love. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, habit stacking. I love habit stacking. I mean, it has helped me with everything. I came to it as a teacher when I was spending every Sunday grading like 100 essays, you know, at 7 o'clock at night, like a bandit, right? How can I get this done? How can I form a new habit? So essentially in habit stacking, you look at your normal day and you look at where the new habit will fit. So mine, I'm going to use my own example. I needed to do grading, right? I look at that and I say, okay, well, that's something that would involve my desk, my pens and pencils. This is a mental activity. So when do I engage in mental activities? When am I sitting at a desk? When am I using pens and pencils? And from those very simple, like building blocks, you look at when the new habit will fit into your day. And in Clear's Atomic Habits, he has a formula for setting the intention. So you either position your new habit before or after something that you do every day. And then that's how you like set the intention. So mine was before I check my email, because now I'm sitting at a desk, right? I will grade about 10 of my papers because I would keep the papers to grade on the desk where the computer was. Checking the email is something that I did every day. Grading 10 papers is not hard to do. That would maybe take me 15 or so minutes. So it was something that I could easily add in where it made sense, and I set that intention using that little formula. And this can work for anything. For students, we will create habit stacks, for example, of using a planner. I have a student on my roster that couldn't figure out like how to incorporate their planner. And then we hit on it. The planner is a book, and this student loves to read. So the student started carrying the planner with the novel because the novel also came with a little pencil to write things down. Before I open my book to read a chapter, I will take out my planner, check it, make sure my homework is done, and add things for the next day. That made sense in that student's life.
That's awesome. I love habit stacking too, Rachel. I also know that, when you're working with kids on setting new habits, that obviously we want to break down the habits to make them easier to manage. But as adults, we really, really want to help kids celebrate wins, because it's kind of like when we talked about the 3 R's, the reminder, the repetition, and the reward. It is kind of like a reward when we're celebrating kids' wins and sharing with them how proud we are. How does that look for you?
This is one of my favorite things because small wins come in so many different packages. A little bit earlier, I was talking about those students on my roster who were having a hard time turning things in. And one of the best small wins lately came when I got an email from the one student's mother. This is a college student. And this student was so overwhelmed by turning things in that they wouldn't even talk about it. And one day, very recently, mom and kid are on the phone, and the kid just casually mentions, "Oh yeah, I went to class, I turned in my paper, then I went out to get coffee." And that sentence, that I turned in my paper, reported home to the family, it was such a small thing, but it was a massive celebration because that was evidence that things were changing for that kid. Not only was the kid hitting their goals, but that was evidence that the way that the kid was thinking about themselves was changing. I have another student that I've been working with for about 2 years now, and very recently just said to me, "Oh yeah, so now everybody comes to me and they're like, oh well, we need to know it from her because she's the smart girl." This is a student who, when I started working with them, was really even against like going to college, and now they're the smart girl. Those are the things that we celebrate. The way that these techniques help kids see themselves differently and help them see all of the strengths that are inside of them.
I may have shared this with you before, Rachel, but it makes me think of I really struggled through high school, and I did not have great habits. But in college, I started to actually develop really good habits.
Yeah.
And I remember when I came home for Thanksgiving break, I decided that I was going to change my ways. And instead of like not doing anything over the break or waiting to the last day, I think it was on Thanksgiving morning or maybe Wednesday, that I took out this paper I had to write, and I was sitting in my dad's home office and I was working on the paper. And my dad walked by me and he's like, "Wow, that's amazing. You've never done that before. I'm noticing how you're working on that at the beginning of your break. That's amazing." And I don't know why I remember that, but to this day, because he noticed something small I did, it just really stuck with me.
Yeah.
And that's why I love celebrating small wins and noticing kids' behaviors when we see them starting to acquire habits that they may not otherwise have done.
Yeah. That's beautiful too, because I would be willing to bet that so many of the kids that we work with, like they are going to have the kind of memories that you have, Anne, of like you and your dad. That's the kind of stuff that as we get older, like I think we can all think about something like that, some moment where we felt really like seen and cherished and supported. And that's the stuff that really makes you like successful and confident as you grow.
For sure. And you kind of alluded to this before, that success really makes you want to take that next step.
Yeah.
And it's a big part of coaching because, when you have somebody on your side cheering you on, helping you find that success, and then you do it, that's motivating to you as the student to want to continue down that path.
Yeah.
And by the way, you can learn more about how we approach habits and how we approach executive function and the steps that we take by finding out more on our website. And you can go to ectutoring.com/executive dash function. When I talk to parents about what we do, sometimes they'll say, oh, is this in person or virtual? And I'll say it's virtual, and it really works out great. And sometimes parents have the conception that it has to be in person, but really for this type of work, it actually works beautifully when you're working through things virtual, because you're doing a ton of screen sharing. And we have a software called Lesson Space that makes it like magic. You're so funny when you talk about Lesson Space, Rachel.
I'm a big fan.
And how technology can make a huge difference in the work that kids do.
I am a big fan of Lesson Space. Okay, like I'm in a Lesson Space fangirl for a second here. This is what I tell students and families whenever I talk to them. Lesson Space is like if Zoom and a smartboard had a baby. So it's all the functionality of Zoom that we have here. Plus, you can have word processor documents in it. I was working with a student just last night and we were doing French conjugation. I am able to find, she was working on the l'imparfait past tense. I found an educational infographic on the web, pulled it off the web, pulled it into Lesson Space, and made a space where we could review that information and work on her French homework all in one collaborative whiteboard. And Lesson Space saves everything. So when we work on a paper, when that student, the French student that I was just talking about, when we go to work on another French homework assignment, that work is saved. It's like a little notebook for us. And also everything is private. Every single Lesson Space, like little classroom, is fingerprinted to a kid. So if nobody can get in there except for the coach and the student, and I just love it. It saves so much time. It's where I keep all my notes. I could talk about it all day, but this is not the time or place.
Thanks for that, Rachel. Oh, and by the way, everybody listening, we're going to go to questions in just a second. So if you do have a question about habit formation, please go ahead and put that in the chat right now. If we can help you in any way, we're happy to help your family. We have one-on-one programs for tutoring, executive function coaching, which is what Rachel is, test preparation, the SAT, ACT, and also college consulting. And Jennifer, Kathy, and Ann Stewart are all amazing program managers. They talk to parents every day. You can scan this QR code and it will take you to their schedule to set up a quick call with them. Or you could just visit our website at ectutoring.com. All right, so Rachel, are you ready? Let's see what parents have questions about. Let me open up the chat. All right, so let's see. Lots of input in the very beginning about how long that it takes to create a habit. So thank you, everybody, for sharing your information. All right, so let's find these questions. Do you work with college-bound students? And the answer is yes, Kimberly. We have kids, we have students all through high school and obviously college, but specifically, I found even for my own kids that one graduated, one's a senior in college now, a lot of support going from high school to college, and having a coach start out with kids like in August. So helping them take their syllabus, put it into their calendar, really working on the things that Rachel talked about as they start their college journey is super positive. And then continuing, many of our kids will continue throughout college. As I mentioned, my son is a senior and he still has a coach, Susan, who's amazing. And she specifically works with college students and high schoolers. So she's awesome. Let's see. Can you also answer questions on executive functions? And yes, so executive functions are cognitive processes in the frontal lobe of the brain. And they have to do with things like, getting started on a task. And a true test is like, can you make yourself get started on a task even when you don't want to do it? And that's, a hallmark of executive function. Can you channel your energy? And then once you get started on that task, can you focus well enough to see it to fruition to finish it? And then can you stop that and transition to a next thing? Rachel, maybe you can talk a little bit about executive functions and, how do you start with a kid who has these issues and then deal with habit formation? Do you have any tips? A parent asked, Denise asked, how do you start with a child who you already know has problems in this and then create habits?
Yeah, I think that this is one thing that I do. I really want to know why the kid has their current patterns. Why, like, in other words, why is this working for you, right? For a lot of kids, it's like, well, okay, I'm really smart, and it doesn't take me that long to do things, and I don't mind doing things at the last minute, you know? And so then you have to kind of, in my experience, almost like look beyond the classroom. Because I think that as adults, we want to think like, oh, well, a kid will be motivated by grades. A kid will be motivated by, doing well in school, and that's sort of like the praise that we get from that. But sometimes what motivates a kid is keeping away from a stressor or having more time to do the things that they're really engaged in and really interested in. So it all depends on the individual kid, but there are like simple things that you can do. Maybe moving homework time like to a time when they're maybe more productive, that isn't really late at night. I think that my biggest tip is start really small. Start something small and start something that's really doable. Like if you're noticing that a kid is having trouble, doesn't know where things are, maybe the first habit to start is, okay, how about if after dinner we check your Schoology together and see what you have due tomorrow? Something really little that you can collaborate on that will help them achieve the goal to get them like incrementally where they want to go.
It kind of goes with our next question from Denise, who says, how old can you help start a child on a habit?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I work with students. My certification area is for everybody 12 and up. So that's and I'm really as an educator, I want to stick with what I know. I'm not ever somebody that's going to tell you something about like what I don't know, right? So I've worked with sixth graders and this stuff works. I have a student on my roster who is she's a parent of one of our other students at Educational Connections, and she's working on a professional certification area. So I'm working with like, a fellow grown-up. So I think that these are things that you can, I don't know, Anne, like what would you say, like kids that have homework, like.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that, Rachel, too. And there's like lots of ways you can develop a habit for younger kids. Even the habit of just getting ready in the morning, which is really hard when you have a child with ADHD or weak executive function skills. Getting out the door in the morning, it can be painful. And so you could have, I really like checklists for little kids, but the checklist can only have like 2 or maybe 3 things. So maybe the issue is getting downstairs on time. And you want to develop a habit around, getting downstairs, let's say by 7:30, so your child can be out the door to catch the bus in time. So you might say, this is one I've shared in other webinars, you need to come downstairs with your coat and your teeth brushed. Obviously you have to be dressed. So you have to be dressed, you have to have your coat on, and you have to have your teeth brushed. So you come downstairs. If you come downstairs by 7:30, then you can play video games until you leave for school or watch TV or whatever. And so you would take those 3 things, dressed, coat, teeth brushed, and you would put them on a little checklist and put it on the child's mirror that they see when they walk into the bathroom in the morning. And so that would be an example of how you develop a habit for a young child. But anytime you want to work with young kids, it has to always be in writing. It can't be like, well, I told you this 4 times. You never listen. The reason it doesn't listen is because kids don't have that capability. in elementary school to retain auditory information. So anytime you can put it in writing, that's always better.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's take a look at, we had a bunch of other questions. Let's see. Can you support kids in the UK? And yes, we actually have kids across the country, in different countries, across the United States and in different countries that we work with. So distance is not an issue. And these issues that we see with kids are pretty universal. Do you have any recommendations for kids that are having to manage multiple classes in middle school and beyond?
Oh, oh, golly, that's everybody on my roster. That's that is really hard because, and I think that I'm probably right now talking to a lot of parents in this group, just a lot of people in general. All of our kids are booked. They are taking so many classes. They have to read a choice book, go to soccer practice, volunteer at the library. One of the things that I do like to do with kids that are very ambitious and booked, I do like to talk to them about time blocking. This is something that's really easy to do. I mean, heck, lawyers do it. You kind of think about your day in terms of billable hours. And this is something that I have done so frequently with kids in my sessions of, okay, let's talk about your day. What time are you waking up? When are your meals? When are we going to sleep? What time is soccer practice? What time is school over? And looking at the time in the day. When kids are juggling lots of things, because I don't know if this is going to speak to this person's question, but in my experience, there's like some procrastination happens. And I really think it's just burnout. I think it's like if you're bebopping through all of these different classes and you're juggling everything, at some point, you just want to sit down and stare at TikTok until your eyes fall out of your head. You just want some downtime. Helping kids see where their work is in their day and where they have free hours can also help them see, oh, well, I mean, I don't have anything going on like from 5 to 7 every night. Maybe I could take 45 minutes and do that math homework. Maybe I could take 30 minutes and read my chapter of my book. Sometimes plotting out where all the hours go in the day helps them see I'm not wasting my time. I just don't have a lot of it, so I need to use it really proactively. Time blocking can be really effective.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. I think time blocking is really great along with habit stacking. All those strategies I know those are all in your ebook.
Yeah.
Rose asked, does your program help with kids that are behind level? So these skills can work for any student, whether you're above grade level, on grade level, below grade level. But if your child has specific issues, like they need to improve their writing skills or their reading comprehension or the math, that would be a little bit different. That's a tutor. And many of our kids have a tutor and they also have an executive function coach. And so, sometimes for many families, having both works really well. For other families, they're like, I can only do one thing.
Yeah.
And that's when you kind of would triage the situation. And we're happy to talk to you about that as well, to see like which issue is causing the most distress to the student. Is it that they can't keep on top of their things? Or is it that they're so upset because feel like they can never catch up in math? And so we're happy to have that conversation with you to determine, what might be the best way forward. All right. So somebody else she said, I appreciate, your tips on why kids don't turn in on assignments. Do you have another tip, Rachel? She asks on when kids are pretty much done with the assignment, how do you get them to take that final step?
I have to be real with you. Everybody that I talked about earlier, the work was done. Like that whole thing, like I'm very sorry that I wasn't clearer earlier because I saw that question too. And I'm glad that we're cycling back to that.
Yeah.
Because all of the students on my roster who are not turning in things, it's like, girl, this paper is done. Like, and I want to talk now just as me, not as coach me, because my thought process is like, how are you doing this whole thing and not turning it in? That may connect with somebody in our audience right now. But coach me, asks different questions. Like, did you need time in class to turn it in? Are you afraid to turn it in? Can I help you turn it in? Because the judgment that I have in my head about that issue, that's my problem. What I need to do is I need to make sure that the student feels supported so that they can start to see new patterns are possible for themselves. And I have to be real with you. I mean, I'm sure, Anne, like you feel the same way. The not turning in stuff, it fries my brain a little bit. Like it's the one I procrastination, get it. Not wanting to do work, oh my God, I never want to do work, right? But you did all the things. So I would say, creating a space where they feel supported, because sometimes the judgment is what gets them to shut down and not turn it in. Showing them like, even if you don't get it, like maybe pretend that you do. Like, oh, because maybe we all understand what it feels like to be judged or to feel scared, right? We can all tap into that. Those are things that have worked for me. Allowing, like, I have one kid that said to me at one point, I've never been able to talk to anybody about this before. It was like a fear of, what if I get a bad grade? The thing that unlocked it for that particular kid was me saying, darling, you realize by not turning this in, you just got a bad grade. Like, let's change things for you so that you're really hitting your goals and feel better.
Totally. Because, as parents, if we say, why don't you turn that in, just turn that in, and we're not getting to the root cause of why is this happening in the first place. And that's really key, is really figuring out, where is this coming from? And as an adult, I mean, I can kind of relate to that, because sometimes I'll construct an email and it's like good enough and I could probably send it, but I think, oh no, I'm going to go back and make it better later on, and then do I? No. And then, I'm like, oh shoot, I forgot to send that email. And it causes so much stress. Well, if I had just sent it the way it was, which was like decent. And so I can relate as an adult to that. And what I've often shared with kids that I know are perfectionists, I'll say to them, and this kind of goes to the parents' question, is 80% good enough? And if the student's like, yeah, that's good enough, and you agree to that before the child even starts the work, then they're much more freeing with themselves, and they're much more willing to turn it in. It just has to be pretty decent. All right, last question. And this is an important one from Miriam. She says, how do I help my child form routines without constantly being a nag? Rachael, as an educator, I know it's totally different when we work with kids as educators. But do you have any tips for this parent on how she could help her child?
Yeah, I want to acknowledge that too, because when I read Miriam's question, I was like, you know what? There's times where, like, even to this day, my mom says something to me, and it's like, girl, you're saying that because you have to. Or like, that's like such a mom thing. But then if somebody else says it, I'm like, well, it's not my mom, So one thing that I will say is that, like, in our sessions, every session, every parent gets detail-rich notes. So you are going to get insight into, like, what we're doing, what the routines are. But I think that one thing that really works, and these are actually things that have come from students that I've incorporated with lots of students on my roster. Ask the kid what they want. Some kids, like, if you say to them, like, hey, I know you're worried about your book that you have to read for your ELA class, your choice book. Do you want to check in on that together? Like, do you want us, like, maybe like we could have just reading time where I could read my book, you could read yours. Do you want me to check in on that with you? Sometimes they'll say yes, and then you can talk about, okay, well, how frequently? Every day, once a week, at dinner, gauge like where they are, because that gives them responsibility over things, that allows them to say, yes, I am concerned about this. And then, especially, like, I'm thinking about teenagers, especially, it's like sometimes they've asked you to do something and then they forget. You're gonna be like, well, hey, listen, don't get freaked out. Remember, we talked about this. This is our little check-in that we're doing. Remember, we talked about that on Saturday. I think that those kind of conversations are so valuable because it allows the student to articulate what they need and they want and to negotiate that with the grown-ups in their life.
Yeah, and to that point, Rachel, if you feel as the parent that you know your child's going to say, no, I don't need your help, you can kind of rephrase that and say, hey, would it be okay if I checked in with you on this on Friday? Because then kids are likely to say, yeah, that's fine. They'll probably forget about it. And then it comes Friday, you can say, oh, I'm just checking in with you. It's much easier for them to palate for sure.
Yeah.
So I love that suggestion.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up, everyone, I want to let you know that a survey will pop up on your screen. And if you would be so kind to fill that out, it will help Rachel and me to understand what you liked about today and how we can bring you good content in the future. Rachel, thank you so much for being my guest. You're awesome.
Anytime.
It was such a pleasure. Thank you, parents, for being there today. I hope this was helpful to you. If we can help you and support your child in any way, we would love to. Feel free to reach out to us at any time. Have a great day, everybody, and bye-bye.